The 2026 MLS season is full of potential, and many clubs will be under intense pressure to carry over their successes from 2025 into the new season, while others will be looking to turn around from really surprising down years and get back into contention. With so many new transfers into the league and teams just generally building the quality of their rosters and their depth, there's certainly so many storylines to talk about and topics to be aware of as we head into the new season. And that's why I'd like to go over my favorite 10 that I'll be looking out for throughout 2026, ones that you should also keep an eye on and see how they develop. Before we get into all of that, please make sure to like this video down below and subscribe to the channel here at MLS Digest. As we head into the 2026 season, we're closing in on 500 subs, and if you're new here, I'd love for you to join the community if you're interested in any type of MLS content. To start things off, I think, of course, we have to dive into Miami and the super team that it seems they're building, somehow legally avoiding all of the roster rules and compliances, working their way around that, somehow getting within those constraints, and yet still just being able to sign really, really good talent and top names, winning out from competition from other MLS, competitors as far as making big signings. Of course, Miami's signed a handful of big name talent. Most known is Germán Berterame, the striker coming from Monterrey, is going to be their final designated player. Of course, as well, the reigning goalkeeper of the year in MLS, Dane St. Clair, as well as Sergio Reguilon, the left back, and David Ajala, the defensive midfielder, to round out that squad. And pair that with Messi, keeping De Paul as well. And it is so much pressure on this Miami team to defend their first MLS Cup title, and it seems like they are the clear favorites to lead the pack and also just go on and win Supporter Shield, something they did 2 years ago but failed to follow that up with an MLS Cup run. So, of course, they have the best roster by far of any MLS team, and it seems like they're growing the gap as far as the parity is concerned in this league. I think it's Miami and then just about everyone else as far as next up contenders. But still, the pressure is on them, and it seems like Messi still is eating up a boatload of minutes. He has back-to-back MVPs, and he still cares about his craft and leading this Miami team to bigger and better, whether that be in MLS, continued success, or as well now in a potential long Champions Cup run that is just about what is left to add to his trophy cabinet with Miami. Next up, and this is really in no particular order of kind of appeal or ranking my favorites one after the other. It's just randomized in a sense. But next up is Nashville, and I think Nashville, of course, behind Miami, has had one of the best off seasons of 2026. They signed Christian Espinoza, of course, and made a bunch of other good moves for the club. I think getting rid of Zimmerman was a key departure. He was a long-serving member of this club since its inception. Essentially, he went off to Toronto, and now you pair that type of a star in Espinoza with Surridge and Mukhtar, who are already a dynamic duo, and this just has potential for so many amazing moments and just a true kind of three-headed dragon that can lead you far into cup competitions and challenge to be a contender in the East. And at the time of this recording, they have already gotten their 2026 season officially started, beating Atletico Ottawa from the Canadian Premier League 2-0 in the first leg of their CONCACAF Champions Cup run. So they get a little bit of a warm-up. They played a very weak lineup, but still got the job done. And in the end, Espinoza got an assist to Surridge in the final minute of stoppage time that they'll take back into the second leg in Nashville. And they have that little bit of a warm-up before the 2026 season for MLS officially starts. But Nashville, again, just a team to really look out for. Just behind Miami, I think they're going to be in the standings. Third on the list, I'm looking at San Diego FC. Now, this was a club that basically broke every record set as far as a club's inaugural season in MLS. They ended up first in the Western Conference, made it to the Western Conference Final where they lost to the Whitecaps. But regardless, I think year 2 holds even more for them, and we've already seen that since their season started earlier than most MLS clubs in the Champions Cup preliminary rounds, where they already got past a formidable foe in Pumas from Liga MX, 4-1 on aggregate, winning 4-0 at home in the first leg, and then only, holding on to only lose 1-0 in the second leg, and now they advance to the second round. So they've already gotten some game action under them, and they seem just as dialed in as last season as far as Mikey Varas' system, just that relentless pressure on the ball. And overall, as a club, I think we're seeing that San Diego still is going to show us even more of why they can be a true exemplary club for upholding MLS standards. They're showing just everything you wanted to see as far as growing the league and the type of club that you want representing the league, with the academy systems, with the philosophy of the type of soccer they play, and just how they go about their transfer business. I think there is still so much more potential for this club, but they are still continuing to set examples and records in not just on the field, but just how they run themselves as a club. In fourth, this is kind of a two-parter as far as what I'm looking out for, but the first half of this, I have to lead with, of course, one of the biggest name signings of the entire transfer window, a late one at that, with James Rodriguez, the late 30s-year-old Colombian attacking midfielder coming from Club Leon to Minnesota United, that cold weather area, something completely unexpected. Maybe not as far as him coming to MLS, but to land in that destination was a little bit not par for the course as far as those types of players from Europe and beyond, that type of market in a sense. And so he comes in, he's on a contract up until about, I believe it is July, so only halfway through the season, up until, of course, the World Cup, so he stays fresh, and with an option to extend that through the entire 2026 season through December. So we'll see how that goes. I think he'll probably stay for the full season, but of course, is this more hype than realistically a player that can bring Minnesota to new heights? I think that's obviously debatable at his age. He's still showing flashes of that brilliance, but certainly shows up more for his national team now than his club, teams, but Minnesota as well. The second half of this for me is Minnesota has really changed in this offseason. It's not just because of that signing. They got rid of so many players. They lost a lot of what I would call their core in a sense, including their coach, Eric Ramsey, who went to West Brom. So they have a whole new coach, probably going to have a whole new style. They lost players like Robin Lod in midfield. Of course, like we mentioned, the reigning goalkeeper of the year, Dane St. Clair. Really good wingback in Joseph Rosales. And, they still retain players like Kelvin Yeboah and the like, and of course get James. But regardless, it's a question of what will Minnesota's identity be, because they were basically like a rugby team in the sense that they really played rough, ugly. They had, yes, of course, a couple of good strikers. They also got rid of Oluwaseyi, who I forgot to mention, midway through last season. But it's going to be interesting to see just how different this team and its playstyle is going to be in 2026, and if they can still be in the middle of the pack as far as those playoff standings in the West, or will they fall off, and will James simply use this as a stepping stone to stay fit for the World Cup? That remains to be seen. In fifth and sixth, I have two clubs with coaches in year 2 going into 2026 with kind of altering different paths as far as, I think, expectations and the way they're perceived and the types of pressures or opposite of that on them or not. So first, we're going to start in fifth with the Union. Philly now in year 2 with Bradley Carnell. Of course, Carnell came into the league with St. Louis as an expansion team when they set records that San Diego now has, of course, broken, but still one of the best expansion teams we've seen. And then in year 2, really fell off a cliff. And then Carnell landed with the Union last season, and of course won the Supporter Shield with one of the lowest budgets in the league, and a club philosophy that is just intrinsically against, competing with the big boys as far as spending. Um, and now the Union once again have gotten rid of a lot of what made them so good last year, and it's going to be a really rough ride, I think, for Carnell, and a lot of expectations to meet that type of level as they did last season, because you have a bunch of players who left, such as Jacob Glesnes, of course, to the Galaxy, Tiber Rebo, Mikel Ura, and Kai Wagner, to name a few of these locked in starters or very good rotational players at the least. And you've replaced them with players from leagues abroad who remain to be seen how their games will translate to MLS. So once again, we can be surprised and pleasantly surprised, that is, by the Union, because they seem to keep performing over expectations no matter how bleak their situation may be as far as the spending and the squad depth. But once again, I think the pressure's more on Carnell than as far as, will we be disappointed if the Union do bad? No, because we just can't expect them to be competitive year after year with the way they are set up as a club. So I think it's on Carnell to get the most out of this club, and with the signings they've made in replacement, can he at least get this team in and around the playoffs, and kind of get over the fact that he is so far a first year kind of success story that turns into a really bad situation once he, in a way, gets figured out as a coach. So that remains to be seen, and I'm interested to see how these new signings for the Union can get implemented. On the flip side of that, in sixth, I have the Chicago Fire with Greg Berhalter now entering year 2 as, in that dual role, also, of course, as the coach, mainly, of course, and the director. And now it's time to build off getting this club back into the playoffs after a 7-year drought, winning in the wild card round, and, playing some pretty competitive matches with the 1 seed Philly, at least in that first game that took it to pens. And then, of course, just building off of that and getting the Fire onto a consistent schedule towards actually competing in the East, getting a higher seed, and potentially, competing for trophies in the Open Cup, etc. So the Fire as well lost a couple of players that were key to them. Of course, Brian Gutierrez, the main one, the academy player. He went to Chivas, and that's a big creative spark gone. But of course, that's a situation where you want to see the player move on, and they got a good amount of money for him. But they replaced him with Robin Ludd, of course, who we mentioned, and they've gotten a couple of other key signings in midfield. They're retaining Andre Franco, who, of course, tore his ACL, and he won't be fit really until the summertime. But you also signed Saletros from the Sweden League, as well as Mbokazi, who has been making waves on social media, the South African defenders. And so I think, in general, the vibes for the Fire are just much higher than, say, the Unions at the moment under Greg Berhalter in year 2. The stadium's on the way. The philosophy of the football is really, really positive. They're playing in a really fun way for the fans, and you're still retaining most of this core, and the defense, which was a bit of a problem just due to the nature of the style that they play. There's just open chances on both ends. I think the defense has improved, and the Fire can definitely take a step forward in 2026 towards returning towards the top and being just in general in the conversation for a consistent contender or team to look out for, rather than, such a big market missing out on something as, like as big as the playoffs for so many years. So I think this is the year to prove that, to continue that, and set the standard, reset it in a positive light. Next up, I'm going to get a bit negative here, because this is not really something I'm looking forward to per se, but it's a situation to monitor, and it's just something that I think has to be brought up because of the big name signing that is Timo Werner. If you want to call it a big signing or not, I mean, I guess that's debatable, but still, it's a recognizable name, and he's gone to the Earthquakes. Now, of course, his best years are behind him. He hasn't really gotten a bunch of playing time with Spurs or Leipzig in the past couple of seasons, his most recent stints. But regardless, can still bring something, is a different type of profile striker, and still probably has a bit of pace left in him, and can still be clinical in MLS. But the problem doesn't really lie with me with Timo. The problem lies with the way the Earthquakes are constructed at the moment, because Bruce Arena, of course, had a lot of, MLS veterans and attacking names to work with last season. But now that's all kind of turned on its head. Of course, Christian Espinoza left for Nashville. Chicho Arango and Josef Martinez are both also gone to, of course, older but also well known for MLS standard strikers. And also Hernan Lopez gone. And this team doesn't really have a lot of age in midfield. It's a very young midfield. The roster depth is really concerning for me, and I'm just wondering who the hell is going to get Timo Werner the ball? Who's going to stand out and be that type of creator in midfield? Now, I'm not trying to downplay the Earthquakes Academy or the youth system, because they have players coming into 2026 that have gotten minutes and, hopefully can take strides in their game this season. But regardless, to consider this team with Timo Werner some type of contender or something in the West would be a little bit far-fetched in my opinion. I just don't think. I think Bruce Arena has so much less to work with as far as the roster is constructed at the moment, and Timo Werner is not going to patch up any underlying deep issues with who else is on this roster at the moment. I just don't think the Earthquakes are going to be that much better off in 2026 than last season. In 8th, I have Tata Martino returning to Atlanta in a turn of events, trying to get the best out of what on paper looks like a solid attacking core, but just completely laid a goose egg dud in 2025 with Lattelat Almiron returning, Lobjanidze, and Miranchuk, of course, all just failing to get on the same page. So Tata returns. Of course, he won MLS Cup back with Atlanta in his first stint, went to Miami and just didn't have a good time there, and has been out of MLS since then, but now returns, and hopefully stint number 2, the return, can bring some life back to Atlanta, because they are just too big of a market in that stadium, and it just seems like when Atlanta is good, the league is in a better place. I know you can say that for a lot of clubs, it seems, but regardless, it's just a kind of a market that you really want to see succeed from a neutral standpoint, I think, and should be doing much better with who they have on that roster. Lattelat in year 2, I expect to take a bigger jump, and of course get more goals, but still, it's a question mark as to how Tata can adjust this team for 2026. They lost a couple of other players in Schlich, who went abroad, and so maybe getting little bit rid of some dead weight and trying to improve the floor of this team. But once again, I think just as a storyline, that's a fun one. A coach returning with a couple of players that he's already worked with, of course, main one being Almiron, and it's hard to really do much worse than they did in 2025, sitting towards the bottom of the East with some other really putrid teams in the Eastern Conference. So look out for that. Let's see how Atlanta starts. Maybe the vibes are back in ATL. In 9th, I have the LA Galaxy. I think that the Galaxy are a team to really look out for as far as coming back from a really shockingly disappointing 2025, the year after, of course, winning MLS Cup, basically being dead last in the West, and just really struggling from a entire team standpoint without, of course, Ricky Puig, who, of course, is going to be out yet again for an entire season after having to go another surgery for that knee. And so that begs the question mark, who's really going to be, standing out in midfield to kind of ease the tension for a Galaxy team that was terrible defensively as well and just let in too many goals. But I think they've made some really important signings in the offseason. One of the better off seasons in all of MLS as well. Of course, signing Glesnes for that back line. Hawk, who is a defensive midfielder, basically turned center back that can be a kind of a makeshift for either. And retaining Nascimento, continuing that loan, signing João Klaus, who really had a frustrating stint in St. Louis, but maybe could be reborn here in LA with the right pieces around him. Of course, you have the killer P's on the wings, and that will just really make life easier, really take the striker out of his own head and keep the focal point off him in a sense. But, they got rid of Fagundes, no Ricky Puig once again. And so as far as that creativity in midfield goes, I still need to, we still need to see players step up consistently. Who's going to really be the one that eases the tension, progresses the ball to these start attacking players. But I think, of course, defensively they got much, much better. And now the Galaxy can really just kind of at least be true contenders as far as just getting into the playoffs, trying to tread along this season, and returning to some level of normalcy as, of course, they await Ricky Puig's return. They'll have to wait another season, so not really, it would be too much to have too high of expectations this season as far as some insane playoff run or anything like that, but they should not be any type of a pushover with the signings they've made. They have a very solid core now. It's just about, can they figure that midfield out without Puig in year 2 without him. Last but not least, it's a sleeping giant in DC United for me as far as what I think the turnaround can be in 2026. They've been really, really pathetic for one of the original clubs of MLS, a team that's glory days were long, long ago, and have really failed to retain the support and interest of its, market and fan base for quite a number of years now. But I think this winter transfer window was really, really positive for them. And they went out and got a bunch of good MLS players and just upped the floor of this team with a couple of true intentful signings as far as Ty Baribo at striker, making him basically the main man on this team. Of course, he bagged so many goals for the Union, the Supporter Shield's winner last year. And getting players like Sean Nealis, Sean Johnson, and getting rid of a couple of, below average players, and just really a complete roster turnaround, in my opinion. You still have Pirani there, who's going to be leading that attack as far as the attacking midfield. And it's just a little bit more competence, right? Just things you love to see out of MLS clubs, making the right decisions, I think, as far as the roster is concerned. And for me, I'm not expecting them to be anything near like above a top 6 seed or something like that, but they could certainly be competitive and not just a complete afterthought in the Eastern Conference this season anymore. And I'm really interested to see now what this play style and tactically how they're going to set up with Baribo now, Pirani, how everything fits in. But at the very least, they've raised the floor of a bunch of key positions, I think, that will really set them up to just rise above and be in contention for probably a lower playoff spot when it's all said and done at the end of the season. But we're not done just yet. I had to throw in an honorable mention as part of the list. And this one is also important, I think, one to look out for. It's a kind of a league overview as far as the Champions Cup is concerned, because I've alluded to that already a few times this video. A couple of teams, or several actually, have already gotten their season started in Champions Cup. At the time of this recording, LAFC and Nashville taking commanding leads in the first round of their Champions Cup runs. In the first legs of those, going to the return home games in leg 2. And also, of course, as I mentioned, San Diego making light work of Pumas. And also, of course, many other MLS teams will be making their debuts in the coming week or two as far as Champions Cup is concerned. But you have some real contenders as far as the, MLS clubs are concerned that can really make deep runs and really challenge Liga MX's opposition when it comes to the later rounds. Of course, I'm looking at you, Miami. That's the one thing left for the trophy cabinet. For Messi, they basically stole one of the top Liga MX teams' strikers from them to get them over the hump for this type of a tournament in Herman Berterame. And of course, as I alluded to, Nashville looking like one of the other kind of stacked teams that can really do damage with that dynamic trio now, with Espinoza joining. And of course, LAFC is going to be in the fold with Boanga, Son, and a bunch of other talent on that team. They basically retained most of that roster. Not too many, moving the needle type of roster moves over the winter, but still, signed Schaffelberg. You have Martinez, and once again, they're making light work of their opponent at the time of this recording tonight in the first round of their Champions Cup run. So I think MLS is going to make even more leaps and bounds towards, maybe knocking off a few Liga MX teams and just getting far in Champions Cup in general. And maybe this is the year that someone comes through and kind of ends this really successful run, of course, for Mexican clubs, because the last team to win it, of course, was the Sounders several years back. So those are the top storylines that I'll be looking out for in 2026. But of course, there's so many more that couldn't make the cut. But with so many transfers and all the offseason drama and the way all these teams are, reshaping for 2026, of course, there's going to be so much to keep tabs on as the season progresses week in, week out. So let me know down below in the comments what your favorite storyline is and what you'll be looking out for as we head into the new season. MLS is almost back, and I'm glad to be here with you all for another season here on MLS Digest. So please make sure to like this video down below, subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you guys in the next video, where we'll be previewing week 1's action, the opening weekend of 2026, with in-depth analysis and expectations for all 15 matches on opening weekend. So make sure you don't miss it. It'll be out in the coming days. So I'll see you guys in the next one.